Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate. This is the way Muslims start every act in their lives. This is sort of the prayer. People always ask us, do you start a meal with prayer? Do you start meetings with prayer? And I say, we start everything with prayer. You get on the car, you say, in the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, and so on. I want to first thank the organizers, Hugh, Dennis Alexander, who recommended me and started the invitation process. Julia and Rachel for all the contacts and all the organization in getting me here and giving this talk. At first, when I got the title, I actually didn't quite pay careful attention. And I thought, I focused on the word evolution, and I thought, okay, this is going to be about evolution. I have spoken before about evolution. I have written several times, including one reference I'll give you at the end, which I think is probably the best reference on the topic of evolution in Islam. And so I thought this is about evolution, and I had overlooked the word creation, and I thought it was about creationism. And so I sort of thought of the topic as creationism and evolution. And that's why if you read the abstract of the talk in the material that has been distributed to you, you will find that it is almost completely focused on evolution. And then as I started preparing the talk and preparing the slides, and then I saw creation, and I looked at the program, and the talk before me was about Genesis, and the talk after me, or at least later in the afternoon, is about creation ex nihilo and science, which I very much look forward to. And I thought, oh, this is about creation and evolution, not creationism and evolution. So I better discuss a little bit the concept of creation first and give it some, not detailed, but some attention before we get to the topic of evolution. So I ended up with a ton of slides. And so you'll please forgive me if I rush through some slides at some point and just flash them. All of this is going to be on the website or the network, and including the PowerPoint and the video and so on. So let's begin with some background on creation. And I think this fits very well. And I think the organizers, in putting together the program and calling this talk Creation and Evolution, and putting it or bookending it with those talks before and after, fits very well with today's theme, because we need to think of evolution and the problems, the theological problems that evolution raises and poses for religious traditions in terms of the idea of creation by God. Creation, just a simple definition for the Islamic context. I was fascinated earlier with the talk by John Walton, that creation has different meanings and creation has to be understood in a certain way. And I think some of those ideas you will find reverberating over here, and some of them are not here. So there is a certain way of understanding creation in the Islamic context as a divine act that brings out something either from nothing or from other elements. Shortly later, I will be explaining that actually creation has even more meanings, that there are even more definitions to the concept of creation in Islam. But even this, with the first statement, you can see already that we have sort of all the elements of the plot in place, meaning, are we talking about creation from nothing, or does creation mean from something? And that would be equally important or equally relevant in reading the scriptures and understanding the science. And that is, I think, we start with it and we'll conclude with it, the crux of the matter. There is also reason or purpose for creation, largely beyond human comprehension, largely beyond. We may not really understand why God created everything that he has created, and what's the purpose of the creation, including the purpose of our own existence. There you see, for example, in one verse from the Quran, the seven heavens and the earth and whatever is in them glorify him, and there is nothing which does not glorify his praise. However, you do not understand their glorification, meaning that they have been created for a purpose, they are doing something, but we don't understand. So we shouldn't really insist on trying to really understand everything that exists, why it exists. God has his own logic and has his own objectives, and they're not always understandable by the human mind. There are different processes and types of creation. I've already mentioned that. So there's instantaneous, and this comes up many times, or at least that's the way it is understood from the Quran, as be and it is. This phrase comes again and again in the Quran. When God wills something, he only says to it, be and it is. And people very often interpret it as being like this, instantaneous, which may not necessarily be the case. And then order is gradual over time. He created you in stages. This is another statement in the Quran. So there are all these elements. Let me go back to history a little bit, to the classical medieval Islamic philosophy. Farabi, very famous, and Avicenna. Farabi is from the 10th century. Avicenna is from the 11th century. View of creation. The world came into being as the result of God's superabundance. And there is this concept of emanation, that the creation is an emanation of God, because God is superabundant of everything, of love, of will, of purpose. So this superabundance is, I think, sort of a new idea in the Islamic context that was brought in by Farabi and Avicenna. Creation proceeds gradually from the most perfect level to the least, which is the world of matter. So the world of matter, really a creation of matter, creation of the universe and nature, is the lowest level of creation and is the last level of creation. And things, at least in the concepts by Farabi, Al-Farabi and Avicenna, Ibn Sina, that's the way it is understood. God emanates not out of necessity, but from a free act of will. Now there was some debate between the philosophers. There's a number of philosophers during that period, and some of them said, sort of, God by necessity creates and exudes love. And some of them said, no, it's not by necessity. There's nothing by necessity. He does it out of his own free will. He wants to exude and produce love and creation. Al-Ghazali, another famous philosopher and theologian from also the 11th century, insists that God creates with absolute will and freedom, and no necessity of overflowing and emanation can be assigned to him. He says, if we think that there is any necessity of love of God, even overflowing love, that constitutes a denial of the absoluteness of divine freedom and will. So here already we start seeing the main theological debates which have lasted for 1,000 years among the Muslim scholars, and that is, to what extent is God absolutely free to do anything he wants, including not follow the laws that he has set in nature, including miracles, small and big, and so on and so forth? Or does God follow the rules that he has put in, and therefore there is some necessity or there is some causation in there? Types of creation, according to Avicenna, I said a moment ago that creation can be defined in at least two ways, and we will see in a moment that Avicenna produces actually 4 types of creation. So in addition of it being a self-awareness and self-discovery of the divine, again, a new idea that we do not find, at least not explicitly stated in the Quran, but this is from the philosophers with some mystical leanings. There is this idea of God wants, again, by necessity or by free will, want to become aware of himself by displaying his attributes, by displaying what he can do, which is in the famous Islamic tradition, 99 names or attributes, with the 100th one completely hidden to us and only known to God. So that self-awareness of self-discovery is another way of understanding the creation, the act of creation. Why does God create in the end? So this is one version of it. Avicenna considers 4 types of creation, and this is, I think this is very significant, because you will see, for example, that what is usually translated as creation. If you ask Muslims, if you do a survey, I would bet that maybe 98 to 99% of Muslims would define creation as this third one here, khalq, which Avicenna says this is only one, and this is only the production, which is creation through other agents. This is not the most spectacular form of creation, if you will, according to Avicenna. Avicenna says there is the most spectacular, the highest, the extraordinary way of creating. That is ihdath. Ihdath means bringing forth something out of nothing. That, if you will, is creation ex nihilo, so to speak. But ex nihilo does not mean only ex nihilo for the universe. It may mean ex nihilo for some objects or creatures. But that ihdath, by the way, is never used in the Quran. So this is also significant in how we understand the creation stories or the creation narrative in the Quran, because this ihdath, which according to Avicenna is the creation ex nihilo, is never used. Then there is ibda, innovation. This is creation without intermediary of eternal, non-decaying creatures. And then there is khalq, which is the typical word. If you ask Muslims, especially Arabic-speaking Muslims, what is the word for creation in your tradition? They will say khalq. They would never mention any of the others. Maybe they might mention takween, which is sort of forming from something, but they will not tend to think of ibda and certainly not of ihdath. So I think this is significant in understanding or going back to enriching the vocabulary of creation in the Islamic context. The main principles underlying creation that one can infer from the Quran. Now, if you read the Quran and say, okay, so let's get all the verses. I am sure that all of you know that in the Quran there is no Genesis, there is no chapter that is devoted to the creation story of the universe or of humans, etc. There are verses scattered everywhere, and then you have to sort of put together all the verses and put them in a coherent narrative. But if you do that, you find that these are the principles that have been that can be inferred, that emerge from the Quranic verses. The universe was created, again, ex nihilo, question mark, by God, who has absolute and exclusive power of creation. His act of creation was one of bounty and mercy. So it is not only love, it is also mercy. Now there's a whole theology discourse on what is mercy. Comes back again and again. You heard me at the beginning say, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. The word mercy is a leitmotif in the Islamic vocabulary. The universe is continuously sustained by God. This is also extremely important, that God creates the universe and doesn't just let it run. The universe cannot run by itself, even though it follows laws of nature or natural laws. There is causation, that also is a huge debate, primary, secondary causation, etc. But everybody in the Muslim world, in the Muslim scholarship, agrees that God sustains the universe. And that's why there is direct contact and direct involvement in everything that happens in the universe with God. The universe was created with a purpose. I think this all theists agree with, or all believers agree with. The cosmos is characterized by wholeness, order, and harmony between all its elements and events. There's countless verses that speak of this in the Quran. There is sort of this sort of argument from design, if you like. If you look at the universe and if you look at all the phenomena, many hundreds of verses that describe the phenomena of nature and the cosmos, and immediately, almost invariably infer, look at the glory of God. So this harmony, this wholeness and order is, again, another leitmotif that comes from the Quran. Cosmic times and chronologies in the Quran are qualitative. There is also the 6 days in the Quran, but there is nowhere in the Quran where it says evening fell and morning followed first day or second day. So there is never any connection between day and night and day or 24 hours. So it's always, and there is also no narrative where the first day here's what happened, the second day here's what happened. So it just says God created the universe in 6 days. We don't have the idea of rest, so that's another difference also. But at least you get these, and so it makes it easier. And I don't know, we don't have young earth creationism, for example, in Islam, in Islam's culture and tradition, neither in the past nor today. I don't know any Muslim who says the 6 days are literally 6 days, not even that the earth is 10,000 years old or 6,000 years old. We don't have any of that because the days are only mentioned as 6 days. So you're absolutely free to interpret the 6 days as you wish. Creation ex nihilo and Big Bang, I think we can have, but here's the reason why I actually brought this up. Ernest McMullen, I met here I think only about a few months or maybe a year before he died. An absolutely wonderful soul, and this is sort of my way of paying homage to Ernest McMullen. He was here and I spent several days with him in one of the summer schools of Faraday. This is why I enjoy so much coming here, meeting people and learning things. Ernest McMullen discussed the word creation and said, the word creation is an explanatory one. It sort of explains the origin of the universe. It points to a cause. These are the words of McMullen. To a cause, meaning a creator in this case, for the appearance of the universe. Obviously, this is not a scientific explanation. This is what Ernest says. Also, divine creation does not necessarily imply ex nihilo. Again, I'm quoting or paraphrasing Ernest McMullen. It is, he says, creation ex nihilo. This is why most people think of creation as being ex nihilo, because it is the most intuitive view, but one can almost equally well argue for a divine origin for an eternal universe. This is also spectacularly interesting and relevant because it is almost exactly the same discussion and the same arguments that occurred between Al-Ghazali, 11th century, and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, a century later in Andalusia. Al-Ghazali famously declared that those philosophers who keep saying that the universe is eternally old, goes back to minus infinity in time, are heretics, because how could you have something eternal next to God who is eternal? You cannot have that. So, sort of to simplify, this is Al-Ghazali's argument. Ibn Rushd explains that, first of all, this idea of whether the universe is eternal or has a time origin is something not for theology to discuss, Averroes says. He says, this is for philosophy. Today we say, oh, this is for science. But he argues, he says, I can argue, he follows Aristotle completely, that actually, rationally, following philosophical logic, I can explain to you why the universe can be eternally old and not conflict with God's eternity, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, says Averroes, if you say the universe started at a certain point, then you get into some complications, namely, why would God decide at that moment to create the universe, and what was he doing before? So this is exactly the same discussion that had occurred 800 years ago in writings between the Islamic philosophers. Issues of beginning and creation are much more philosophical than scientific. Again, this is Ernest McMullen who says, both Muslims, from Al-Kindi to contemporary scholars, and Christians, most famously Pope Pius XII, have equated creation with Big Bang ex nihilo theory. So, in modern times, almost all the scholars, in Islam at least, and probably many in the Christian world, prefer creation to be ex nihilo. It identifies with the Big Bang, everybody is happy. But that is not necessarily the case. There is no indication, of course, that the universe is was not created at a certain point. Everything we know today is about the Big Bang having occurred 13.8 billion years ago. But there are all kinds of theories, no evidence, all kinds of theories that explain that the universe could have been much older, come from another universe, or split or transitioned from another earlier universe. There's a singularity or non-singularity at a certain point, etc. Creation of life and humans. The Quran repeatedly mentions the creation of the heavens and the earth, of humans especially, and of animals, of stars and planets, of rivers and mountains, of trees and fruits, all as an object of reflection. So this is again another important idea that I try to emphasize, at least for my Muslim brethren, to tell them, look, the Quran is not trying to give you a scientific description. It's not trying to even give you a chronology. It's not trying to explain to you how things function and why they are there. It is only mentioning all these phenomena and these examples to push you to reflect, point, period. That's it. So, and that's very important not to get into, and we have in the Muslim world so much of that, of trying to dig science from the Quran, or to project science into the Quran and try to find, earlier this morning we heard of concordism. No scenario of creation is presented, I've already mentioned that, unless one takes literally in the sense that was explained this morning, meaning with our vocabulary of today, with our cultural river of today. If we do that, then there will be verses that you can read literally and then say, oh, wait a minute, contradiction, this doesn't work with the science. Oh, there's a problem. And I have had countless people on social media and on YouTube, etc., respond to me that the Quran does not mention any evolution anywhere, never says that humans evolved from anything. On the contrary, the Quran says clearly that God created Adam or humans from dust. So it's exactly the same discourse, it's exactly the same ideas, and you see it here. And of his signs is that he created you from dust. By the way, here in the Quran, the from is there. The word from is there. I don't have the luxury of getting out of that quandary that you were able to get out of. I can't get out of it. It does say from dust. But then people interpret it in different ways. Again, yes, of course, you have to interpret. It is human language. This is written in Arabic. Arabic is not an eternal language. It was not descended from God, etc., etc. And people start to say, oh, but from dust just means from matter, because we have matter and we have spirit. The same words, by the way, nafas, etc., exactly the same words in Arabic and in the old Hebrew language. And so this is only pointing to the material aspect of humans, and also it is reminding you of your humble origins, not to think of yourself as godly, or not to think of yourself as being an extraordinary element of creation. We are part of the creation, not sort of the epitome or anything like that. And the Quran repeatedly warns against arrogance in looking at ourselves. But in fact, even a similar verse, who perfected everything which he created and began the creation of man from clay. You see here? It's again from, but began from. Has been interpreted as conforming with evolution, as I say. No problem. It started, it began, and it tells you that there was obviously a whole process, a long process. And again, you find all these other verses, and he created you in stages, and it is who created you from clay. Then he decreed the term era. So obviously there are some epochs. The Lord said unto the angels, I am to create a hominid, bashar, again, same word, out of clay. And when I fashioned him and breathed into him of my spirit, then do prostrate from him. It doesn't say, okay, here it is. Anyway, so there's more than enough material to discuss in the Islamic tradition between the creation ideas and concepts and what we now know from science and other fields. So what do Muslims believe today? We now sort of start moving toward evolution. As you can see, we've transitioned to the question of evolution. So I want to show you a few surveys just to sort of set the stage. So what do Muslims believe? One of the earlier sort of striking, it was striking for those who don't live in the Arab Muslim world, surveys that showed to what extent is evolution accepted or rejected in the Muslim world was in this paper in Science. This is 10 years ago now almost. And it showed the results of surveys done in 6 countries, from Kazakhstan to Egypt and Malaysia. Green here means could not possibly be true, meaning this is rejection of evolution. The green, I always tell people when I show this slide, this should have been put in red so people get the message better. But the green here means rejection, total rejection of evolution. The acceptance of evolution is over here on this side. And here you get the I'm not sure, probably, stuff like that. So that was in 2008, and people said, oh my God, we have more than half the Muslim world who completely reject evolution. And we were like, duh, really? We've known this for a long time. In fact, for me, it was like, oh, really? Only 50, 60%? I thought it was a lot more. And actually, there are a number of other surveys. Around that time, you have to remember that 2009 was the anniversary, the Darwin anniversary, 200 years of his birth and 150 years of the publication of The Origin of Species, on the origin of species. So there were a lot of interest in evolution around the world, etc., etc. So for example, you can see here, there was this large McGill-Harvard project that surveyed a number of countries and found that, for example, 80% of Pakistani students believe humans were created separately and in their present forms. 15 out of 18 Pakistani biology teachers rejected human evolution. And it goes on like this. And some biology teachers in Indonesia used maybe probably still use creationist material produced by Harun Yahya. Those of you who don't know Harun Yahya, I'll get to him in a minute. Results from Egypt, similarly, the gist of the matter here is a large majority of teachers and students reject evolution, and in fact tell each other to reject evolution. They teach in many countries. In Egypt, evolution is taught in high school. In Lebanon, it is taught. In the UAE, where I live, it was taught until about 2010 or so. And then from the pressure that I will mention, it was dropped from the high school curriculum. But almost everywhere, even when it is taught, the teachers tell the students, don't worry about it. This is just what we have to teach, and these are the answers you have to know if you get this in the exams. And remember, we have a sort of final high school exam, which I, the teacher, don't get to write, so I can't guarantee you won't get that question. So, but just in case you get that question, here's what you need to say. So that's how it goes. At my university, I conducted a similar survey, much smaller, about 100 to 150. And the interesting thing here, and I cannot dwell on it, it's in my book, is because at my country, at my university, the American University of Sharjah, we have a huge diversity of population, both of students and of professors. Of students, we have more than 80 nationalities, and of professors, we have more than 40 nationalities. Many of them from all over the world. And so it was a good sort of laboratory to run a survey. So this, to go quick, is evolution true or not, to simplify. And as you can see, the striking part, this is what I kept emphasizing when I published these numbers, is that there is no difference between the answers of Muslim students and Muslim professors. Almost no difference. There is a huge difference with non-Muslim professors. But you can see here 60%, 62% of Muslim students and professors say evolution is only an unproven theory and I don't believe in it. Case closed. Those who really believe evolution is a strongly confirmed theory by evidence is only in the 10 to 15%. That's why I said when I saw the numbers in the science paper like 60%, I think it's a lot more than that. Anyway, humans may so this is about humans here. For humans, it gets even worse. So you get about 90% of people saying humans definitely did not evolve from earlier species. That's the summary of all this. Teaching evolution, should evolution be taught? I asked questions to the survey participants. And here you get sort of a mixed reaction. So from Muslim students, Muslim professors, non-Muslim professors, evolution is against religion. It should not be taught. So you get 32% here, 12% here. Non-Muslim professors, nobody says it should not be taught. Evolution should be taught, but as just a theory. Here you get big numbers over here. Evolution should be taught as a strong theory. The numbers are rather small here, except for non-Muslim professors who say, yes, it is a strong theory and should be taught. Anyway, so this is just to give you some idea. I'll skip over this. Amy may not be too happy with me skipping all this, but this is from the British Council Darwin International Survey in 2009. Same story. You can see Egypt here, among other countries, is one of the lowest numbers here of even having heard of Darwin. And this continues in the same survey. Do you agree or disagree that it is possible to believe in a God and still hold the view that life on Earth, including human life, evolved over time as a result of natural selection? Here you get sort of a split. Can you be an evolutionist and a believer and believe in God? Muslims in Egypt say half say yes, half say no. Whereas we see in almost everywhere else, the numbers are much higher. Do you agree or disagree that enough scientific evidence exists to support Darwin's theory of evolution? In Egypt, only 25% agree with this. Most people say no, there isn't enough scientific evidence. There's tons of material on the web. Just last night, due to my jet lag, I was watching one of the videos, this Iyad Qunibi, a professor of pharmacology in Jordan, associate professor no less, who has a whole series debunking evolution, including destroying the evidence from genetics and all of that. So people, very, very few people really know the evidence for evolution and accept it and take it in. Now, then I was very surprised in 2013 when the Pew Forum published a big survey on all kinds of things, religion and public life, and had one question on evolution, belief in evolution. And as you can see here, it gets a lot more, I mean, the plot thickens, as you say, because those who think that humans evolved over time, and you saw the earlier numbers, even from the British Council survey, from my survey, from many other surveys, were very high. Those who reject the fact that humans evolved from earlier species, here in the Pew Forum survey of 2013, the numbers are much higher. Here it says roughly 50–60% of Muslims believe that humans evolved from earlier species. And I'm saying, what? Really? So this is sort of to be continued or to be followed. I'm really shocked by these numbers over here. This is Lebanon. Okay, Lebanon is a mixed bag. So let's leave Lebanon aside. It's multi-faith, multi-denomination, etc., etc. But the Palestinian territories, 67% of the people believe that humans evolved from earlier species. I don't believe this. No, I really don't believe this. With all due respect to the Pew Forum. In Morocco, 63%? No. I was in Morocco just 4 months ago. No. No. So anyway, 2014, this is for the US. This is for the US and comparing different denominations. So over here is the Muslim results. So over here is, so let's see. Here is evolved. And here is always existed in the present form, meaning creationism. So this is total evolution, this is total creationism, and here is something in between, meaning guided evolution, or I'm not sure, etc. And well, I mean, we could take time to compare. So how do the Muslims in the US compare in accepting evolution with other denominations? Of course, Jehovah's Witnesses, but that's different. Mormons, Orthodox Christians, Black Protestant, evangelical Protestants, Catholic, Buddhist here. Anyway, so there's a lot of debate and figures, surveys. Now we're flooded with numbers that we are not sure how to put together. To sum up, when people ask me about evolution in the Muslim world, I say roughly 60% are creationists, about 15% accept evolution and know what Darwin roughly said and accept that it has become established by scientific evidence, and about 25% either accept it gingerly or accept it with human exceptionism, that yeah, I accept all evolution, but humans are different, or I'm not sure, so there's a 25% in the middle. But there's at least 60%, roughly, it varies from one place to another, but roughly 60% who reject evolution altogether. Now, Muslim scholars and evolution, this could take me a long time and I need to accelerate. Just to show you, here's the abstract of the next 10 slides or so. The idea here is, if we look back in history, again, 1,000 years ago, you will find that there was a lot more open-mindedness toward the idea of evolution. Of course, Darwin's evolution did not exist at that time, but you can find, and I will show you some quotes, some ideas of transformation of species. You will find some ideas of even Lamarckism being spoken earlier on. So you will find some ideas of, yes, we can see that the birds really evolved. Yes, we can see that the animals adapt to their environment. You can see some such ideas, a lot more. And in fact, even post-Darwin, in the late 19th century, the scholars of the Muslim world debated, discussed, some of them accepted, some of them critiqued Darwin, but there wasn't this sort of blanket rejection, which I will show you in a moment, that we witnessed toward the end of the 20th century and still ongoing in the early 21st century. So for example, Al-Jahiz. Al-Jahiz is a philosopher, writer, literary author, very well known, and also sort of a naturalist, maybe zoologist, has a famous book called The Book of Animals. Animals engage in a struggle, this is a quote from him, animals engage in a struggle for existence, for resources, to avoid being eaten and to breed. Environmental factors influence organisms to develop new characteristics. So this is where you start seeing sort of a Lamarckism at play. New characteristics to ensure survival. So it's the environment that pushes the new characteristics to appear, thus transforming into new species. This is him saying. And this is 9th century. Animals that survive to breed can pass on their successful characteristics to offspring. So this is almost verbatim Lamarck. Ikhwan al-Safa even tells you that according to them, there was transformation from plants to animals. So if a plant reaches this high level of development, only one step separates it from the animal range, and that is to take off from the ground and move in search of food. In other words, for them, the difference between a plant and an animal is an animal moves around to find its food, and the plant just stays where it is. But they say if the plant then moves, somehow it acquires this ability to move and takes off and no longer becomes tied to its place waiting for its food, new organs form in it to allow it to perform its new task. It then has become an animal. So they have no problem in species developing into other species. Ibn Khaldun, this is not even a naturalist, this is not a scientist, this is not a zoologist, this is a sociologist. He is famously considered as sort of the father of sociology of nations, not sociology of communities, maybe even of communities. Anyway, Ibn Khaldun, 14th century, from North Africa, from Algeria, Tunisia, moved on to Egypt. Look at the world of creation, how it started from minerals, then plants, then animals, in a beautiful way of gradation and connection, where the end of the horizon of each, so this is sort of the, what's it called, the great chain of being. So the great chain of being. So he starts with his discourse with some kind of a great chain of being. But then it becomes more interesting, because he says, the animal kingdom is vast and diverse in its species, such that it reached in gradual formation the human being. So there is now a possible transition in the great chain of being from animals to humans, who distinguishes himself, the human being, by mind and vision. To it, the animal kingdom has risen from apes, which possess conscience and feeling, but not vision and thought. So this is what distinguishes apes from humans according to Ibn Khaldun, and that is the start of the human world. This is what we observe. So these ideas, and you read this and you say, oh my God, take me back to those times. I want to live with these people. I'm sure many of you know Rumi, famous mystic poet, again has this long, beautiful poem where he describes himself in a sort of a long history, or what's it called now today, they call big history type of narrative, where he says, I used to be a little rock. And then this rock did this and it became. And then that did this and then it became. And he tells his own story, so to speak, metaphorically for humanity, as having transitioned gradually from rocks all the way to human beings. Beautiful poem. Anyway, in modern times, even in modern times, this is a book written, Adl Ziyadat, Western Science in the Arab world, the impact of Darwinism. So this is a book that was published in 1986, looking at how the Arab world reacted to the Darwinian revolution, but only in the early times, from 1860 to 1930. You remember Darwin's book, 1859. So he says, a number of influential Arab thinkers of modern times, influential, denied the fact that the theory of evolution was a discovery of Darwin and Wallace. Others indicated that what Darwin explained was a part of Arab elaborations on the whole notion of transmutations. He's saying not only we don't have a problem with that, this is ours. Muslim writers provided a religious sanction to Darwin's science. They were not rejecting. They were saying, we bring religious support to this idea. We bring even historical support. Guys, it's ours. Don't take it. Don't call it Darwin's theory. Anyway, so I'll skip over all this. Now we get the real trouble. Harun Yahya is this guy. This is the pen name of this guy, Adnan Oktar is his real name, Turkish guy, who is not a scientist, is not a philosopher, is some self-educated guy who I think has a diploma in decoration or something. Seriously, from Istanbul University, but somehow accumulated huge wealth. There's all kinds of questions about that, but that's not our issue. And started this huge campaign against Western ideas, including evolution, but including masonry, and he sees the Masons almost behind everything. And so he has these big books, the Atlas of Creation, big volumes. I think he has 5 volumes or something. I only have one at home. And this is his spokesperson, so to speak. This is his scientist. This is the guy that goes around and represents the Harun Yahya position, which is total creationism, that everything that the evolutionists are telling you are a fraud, and I'm not making up the word, is a fraud. This is a conspiracy. The Western world wants to impose its materialistic ideology, and that's why it promotes evolution and teaches it and spreads it into the Muslim world, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so you get tons of this in many, many languages. I think it's something like 50 languages distributed for free. An amazing work. And I mean, the arguments are really laughable when you open the book and you read. And it's on all the websites, so you can read. But the problem is, and I'm going to have to skip all of this because I only have about 3 minutes left. I'll have to skip all this stuff about Harun Yahya, etc. But there's a lot to say on that. But I'll summarize it into two things. One, the arguments are often taken from American creationism. And sometimes they're almost verbatim. And people have written, and there is established collaboration between the two groups, including some of them going to the US and testifying in some of the famous trials that occurred in the US, intelligent design and all that. And vice versa, there have been advisors from the American creationist movement going to Turkey, advising the educators and the movement on how to prepare books and how to counter evolution and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing. Number two, the arguments, the methodology that is used is far from a methodology that you would expect from a serious movement or a serious discourse. There's all kinds of selective quoting. There's, how do you say, distortion of the statements that are made by scientists. So sometimes they will say, and there is this paper that appeared, and it says this. And you read it and you say, really? Really? Oh, wait a minute. I better go and check. Really? And you go and check and you say, wait a minute, you took 1.5 sentences from the whole paper and you interpreted it. That's not what the paper is saying. And this is done again and again and again and again. But the problem, to sum up on this chapter, the problem is this is hugely influential. It has reached all corners of the Muslim world. Their books have been distributed to educators, to biology teachers, and they use them very often as their backup for whenever question comes up or how to teach one idea or another that is related to evolution. So I'll skip all this. There's all kinds of nonsense that goes on now here. I'm just going to flash some major scholars of today or just yesterday. Some of them have died in recent years. Major scholars who are absolute creationists. So this is Zalul Najjar, who is actually a geologist, Egyptian geologist. A professor, a university professor. He says that he has supervised dozens of theses of PhD and masters, and he says the latest. So this is a quote from when the Ardi story came out, Ardipithecus ramidus, I think it's called, came out in 2009, and it was a big deal, and everybody was reporting on it. It is changing a little bit the chronology of what we know about human evolution, etc. And he and many others took it as, oh, this is a discovery that says that human evolution did not go along what the evolutionists say. Say, no, it is just changing some of the details. But he took it to mean human evolution is now out. And so in interviews with Al Jazeera, for example, he says the latest scientific findings represent a strong blow to Darwin's theory. And he says Westerners have started to return to their senses from evolution and Darwin. So I'll skip all this, and I'm sorry that I prepared too many slides. Again, this is all Harun Yahya. I'll skip Harun Yahya. Another big scholar, the father of modern Salafism in Yemen. The theory of evolution is heresy, and it is strongly haram. Haram means religiously forbidden for Muslims to study it. Not just to discuss it or to believe any of it, to study it. This is perhaps the biggest Salafi Wahhabi scholar of the 20th century, was the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia until his death in 1999. Darwin was wrong. Adam was perfectly human, and he was 60 cubits in height. That's 27.4 meters. Then humans got smaller. He says actually the evolution was, from big to smaller. And you say, where are the bones? Where are the fossils that support your idea? He doesn't even know what fossils mean. So that's what you get. You get these big scholars. Again, as I said, I have slide after slide. Islamic scholar in the Wahhabi tradition. For humans, we know everyone descends from Adam and Eve. No discussion. He says, okay, there's nothing to discuss. Another Yemeni famous scholar, Zindani, Darwin's theory. There is no evidence of humans having evolved from apes. Evolution was not even a theory, only a hypothesis, and it was defended by materialists. See, this is again the how do you say, the rationale. This is the idea. This is the explanation for why there is so much evolution discourse in the world and why it is taught in almost all universities. It is because materialism has taken over the world, and that's what we need to combat. I have 2-3 minutes, maybe? Okay. So again, we'll skip all these big scholars from Egypt now. I just skipped over 2. From Pakistan, Al-Mawdudi, extremely famous and influential. From Syria, Al-Buti, some of the biggest names, really biggest names, all total creation. Then you get Islamic universities even from a country that is hugely moderate like Tunisia. And these universities and these religious institutions issue fatwas. A fatwa is a religious decree, meaning this is allowed, this is not allowed. So they issue fatwa saying evolution is not permissible as a field of study or as a theory to be accepted or something like that. So this is from Tunisia, 2010. Sayyid Hussein Nasr, this would require at least 15-20 minutes to get into his ideas. This is one of the biggest philosophers, Muslim philosophers of the 20th century, and I'm not exaggerating. He has over 500 papers published. He has over 50 books published, and he has, disciples everywhere in the Muslim world. And he says, but I actually studied physics and geology at Harvard. And he says, on that basis, from my philosophical background, Islamic background, and my knowledge of physics and geology, I reject the ordinary understanding of the Darwinian theory of evolution, even on scientific grounds. And he goes on. I mean, some stuff is just really unfortunate, really, to say the least. A lot of the pictures and paintings used to demonstrate evolution are a hoax. 95% of our neurocells are similar to those of monkeys, but this does not prove anything. And it goes on like this. Another contemporary scholar, Pakistani, Canadian, chemist by training, and Islamic scholar by vocation. Again, total rejection of evolution. Fatwas, I've already mentioned several fatwas. This one is from Egypt, from the Egyptian Dar al-Ifta. More from Pakistan. Then there is this interesting position voiced by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Yusuf al-Qaradawi is probably the most famous and influential Muslim scholar of today, of the last 30, 40 years. He's based in Qatar, he's originally Egyptian, now has all kinds of political problems, but that's a different story. And in 2009, he used to appear on a weekly show on Al Jazeera to discuss a religious topic. And in 2009, again the Darwin anniversary, this Islamic show decided to discuss Darwin. And so he was asked, okay, so is it even permissible to study the origins of life, the origins of the universe? What is the Islamic position on what we should research, what is open to research, and what is closed? He says, even research into the beginning of creation is allowed in Islam as long as one keeps in mind that we are looking into creation, meaning that there is a creator. In other words, he says, every type of research, every type of idea is permissible as long as it is under the umbrella of God. So you don't take these ideas into materialism. If you keep it under theism, then all the ideas of transformation, evolution, etc. is fine. And he adds, he says, if Darwin's theory is proven, we can find Quranic verses that will fit with it. So there isn't really a problem. The reason why he says that is because his book of reference is this book here from a Muslim scholar of Lebanon who wrote a book in 1887. So actually in preparing for his show, Al-Qaradawi went and read this book. This book, which was the first Islamic scholarship response or commentary on Darwin. So this is 1887. It's about 30 years, 28 years after the publication of On the Origin of Species. And Hussein al-Jisr says, at that time, he says, there's two things that interest me in this. So he's discussing Darwin's theory in some detail. One is it proven? Is there strong evidence for it? And he says, I am not convinced that there is clear, strong scientific evidence for it. But if there is, and if it acquires strong evidence, which it did later, then I have no issue with it. Then I don't find any problem with it with the Quran. Number two, he says, is it a materialistic theory or ideology? Is it imposing, does it necessarily imply that God is out, that everything is matter now? And he says, it could be, but we have to be careful. It doesn't have to be. And so we have to sort of watch this materialistic potential in Darwin's theory. And that's exactly what Qaradawi says. So Qaradawi takes from this, that's the book, and runs with it. So I'll just skip here to a new generation of scholars. So now this is in the last 5-10 years, we have started to see some new scholars in Islam, some of them religious scholars and some of them scientists, emerging on the scene and changing the debate a little bit, or at least balancing it a little bit. This is a fast becoming very famous Muslim scholar who is based in Vienna, is of Palestinian origin. Adnan Ibrahim is rather young, actually, he's only 52 or so, had in December 2014 produced a 30-episode video series on the theory of evolution in Arabic. The only episode 1 is available in English as far as I know, but the rest of it is all in Arabic, and it is extremely detailed and supportive. Even though he's a Muslim scholar, but his original education was in pharmacy, I think, or medicine. Huh? In medicine, I think it's pharmacy, but in medical sciences. Anyway, then there are the scientists. Some of the biologists, finally, the Muslim biologists are speaking up. So we have people like Rana Dajani over here, who I think has visited Cambridge before and has given talks here. Yeah, she's a biochemist from Jordan, teaches evolution, has a one-page article in Nature, appeared 2-3 years ago, why I teach evolution to Muslim students. And of course, everybody went crazy. But she's very devout, as you can see, very devout. I know I've known her for more than 10 years. Very devout, rather conservative even in her devotion and her practice of Islam, but is very strong on evolution, very clear on evolution. Then you have somebody like Ihab Abu Hayf, is a top biologist at McGill University, holds an endowed chair, and is also co-director of a new center, it's been like 3-4 years now, on Islam and science at McGill, and very strong defender of evolution and its compatibility with Islam. So, conclusions and recommendations. The concept of creation, this is just to sum up and bring back to the creation idea I started with. The concept of creation requires some rethinking in light of new advanced scientific knowledge. It will take a long sustained effort and a considered approach to convince Muslims, by and large. Need to emphasize the distinction between the empirical facts of evolution and the theory or theories. More biology does not always improve the situation. Just teach them more biology and they will come to their senses. That doesn't work. So that's use Islamic intellectual history as a helpful resource, as I try to show you. There's a lot that people, when they see that, say, oh, really? That great scholar used to think this? Then who am I? Why am I having problems with that? So, strong need for training of teachers, importance of reaching out to religious scholars and preachers. Muslim academics must engage the public. Pushing back, I'll skip this. This was a quote that I found that sort of bothered me and upset me in evolution education outreach. We have to be careful. People need to be careful in the West, in particular, not to present the Muslim culture and society as simplistically and as wrongly as this was done in 2009 in a paper published in a journal. So I'll stop here. This is the reference I mentioned to you this was about 2 years ago, I think now, 18 months ago or something, Islamic Theological Views on Darwinian Evolution in the Oxford Research Encyclopedias that you can find at this thing. Thank you very much, and apologies for the delay.
Nidhal, very much. And now we have plenty of time still for questions. So let me hand over to you.
You mentioned the debate which was between Al-Ghazali and Averroes. What was the result of that debate when he asked if we claim that the universe has a beginning, so two questions will appear, like what was the God doing before that, and also why he decided to create the universe in this particular time.
So there's no result to a debate when there is a century separating the two debaters, right? I mean, Averroes, my idol, you probably know, was in a way lucky that he was not followed by another Ghazali, or that Ghazali didn't come after Averroes. So he sort of had the last word. So what was the answer by Averroes? Averroes says a time is a dimension of the universe. Time is not related to God. Time is like space. It's like saying, okay, 1 meter. So what does 1 meter represent for God? Nothing. 1 meter is our way of measuring things here. We have 3 plus 1 dimensions. And so time is 1 dimension in our universe. So past, present, future, etc. don't exist for God. God is outside all of time. And so God created what to us was a beginning, but for him it was probably in time eternal, in his knowledge. So we can't really discuss what was God doing before. There's no before and after for God to begin with, whether as related to our universe or outside of our universe. Now, secondly, Averroes says there is a fundamental difference between finite and infinite. God is, by definition, infinite. He is omnipotent, he is omniscient, he is omnimerciful, he is infinite in all directions, to cite another idol of mine, Freeman Dyson. Anyway, whereas the universe is by definition finite. Even if it is eternal, it is still finite. So it is physical and finite, whereas God is infinite in every regard. So there's no comparison. So we cannot say, oh, you can't have an eternal with another eternal. This is just like Cantor, for example, for those who know philosophy of mathematics, saying all infinities are not equal, to put it simply. In fact, if you divide one infinity by another, you might get 0 because the first infinity is much smaller than the other. Or if you divide infinity by another infinity, you might get infinity because this one is infinitely greater than this infinity. So that idea of infinities or of sets that are both eternal do not necessarily mean that there is this association in the Islamic concept, shirk, associating with God something that is equal to him. Averroes says, nobody says the universe is equal to God in any way. So there is no issue. So he says, if you read the Quran literally, again, God says that at a point he said, I decided to create the universe. And that's what Ghazali says. Look, hey, you read this verse, why are you getting ahead of yourself? And Averroes says, because those verses are not to be read literally, that philosophy can bring additional understanding. Now we say, actually, cosmology is not a philosophical topic, it's a scientific topic. So you go back to science to tell you how the universe evolved, whether there was a singularity at the beginning or not, whether it transitioned from something else, whether there are other universes. Anyway, to make a long story short, Averroes says, there's no issue. There are no serious theological issues with what Ghazali is saying, and they certainly do not warrant Ghazali's condemnation of the philosophers as having fallen into heresy for having said that.
Thank you. The lady in the middle there.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if Averroes and Ibn Sina and Ibn Khaldun and the others had these amazing insights. Did they come from the Quran or from where?
Very good, very good. In those cases, they did not come from the Quran. So the philosophers felt that the Quran was just a book of guidance. Is by nature a book of guidance. But all reflection, all detailed, deep, complex, sophisticated, far-reaching reflection and discovery has to be done by the mind, by reason. There were other scholars, including even some scientists, who said I find inspiration in the Quran. I do not take my science from the Quran, but I find inspiration in why don't you go and observe this? Why don't you do this? There are statements in the Quran that say, for example, go roam in the land and observe how creation was started. And so he said, God is telling me to go and do and look. Look at the planets and the stars and how orderly they are and what movement they follow, etc. He said, God tells me, go look. So, and some of them have written, said, this verse is what led me to become an astronomer, for example. So in some cases there was encouragement, inspiration found in the Quran, but not in the case of philosophical issues.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, there was a question at the back.
I know why you're clapping for me. Because I often raise up my hand and then I wasn't recognized. Yeah, the world is becoming global, where we have lots of mixed religion and faith and spirituality. All of your studies, I found out that there are like studies done in Muslim-dominated areas. So what kind of data or what have you found out from areas where we have mixed religion? Because I foresee that we in our world today we might have nations becoming more mixed.
Become what?
Becoming more mixed in terms of religion. In Britain, for instance, 200 years ago, it's mostly Christians, but we see now we have a lot of Muslims and other religion, Jewish, even Britain and Canada and other countries. So what sort of data do we have for mixed settings like nations or countries? And is that important to your worldview? How important is that to your worldview? Because in one of your slides, you neglected, I think, Lebanon, which has about 74% that rejected evolution. Said that is not important. I don't know why you decided to.
Yeah, okay, thank you for asking for clarification. First of all, I think we will have Amy speak this afternoon, so she will tell you about mixed place or what are the views found in places where people are mixing, such as the UK. I didn't dismiss Lebanon as unimportant. I said Lebanon is mixed religion and mixed denominations, and therefore when you see a number that just says 62%, what does that mean? And if we're talking about Muslim views on evolution, I can't just take a number from Lebanon and say, okay, the Muslims in Lebanon accept Darwin at 62% level. You understand my view? So I'm not dismissing Lebanon. I love Lebanon. I have all kinds of friends from Lebanon, and since I'm being recorded, I better be politically correct. I wasn't dismissing Lebanon by any measure. I'm not dismissing any country that has mixed denominations and mixed religions. On the contrary, I think that's enriching. And my friends, including Dennis and others, will tell you that I have learned a huge deal from the Christian scientists and the Christian philosophers. And in fact, sometimes I get criticized for having adopted some views from the Christian apologists. So no worries from my side, I assure you.
Following the idea of mixed societies, within Islam there are many different traditions.
Sure, yeah.
So do the opinions vary within the different Islamic traditions?
Very good, yeah. So it gets even more complicated than I showed. The big two divisions, of course, is Sunni and Shia. The Shia represent roughly about 12% of the Muslim population around the world. In some countries, they are the majority. In Iran, they're about 90%. In Iraq, they are about 60%. In Bahrain, they are, I think, 50-60% or something. Anyway, so there are a few spots where the Shia are majority. The rest of the world, the rest of the Muslim world is mostly Sunni, from 80-90%, sometimes 99%. Almost everything I have presented and all the scholars I mentioned are all from the Sunni tradition. The Shia tradition tends to be a little bit more rationalistic, so to speak, a little bit more open to new ideas, even, let's say, non-traditional, I was going to say non-orthodox, but non-traditional ideas. But it is difficult to put them in the same presentation because their Islamic references, even of course the Quran is the same for everybody, Shi'i, Muslim, or Sunni, or anybody. The same Quran, letter by letter, word by word, there's no variation of any kind. There are no versions of the Quran. The hadiths is where it becomes very, very contentious. There are books of hadith that are totally acceptable and revered by Sunni Muslims that are completely rejected by the Shia, and vice versa. And vice versa. And of course, the whole political, even not theological, but sort of religious establishment structure of the Shia tradition is completely different from the Sunni tradition. So it's very difficult if I started to present a Shi'i scholar, then say, wait a minute, but his references are different, and he takes this hadith to be this and not to be that, etc., etc. So for example, you saw that, that Islamic scholar who insists that Adam was 27.4 meters big, right? And he's not just some stupid guy who's bringing some stupid figure. That is from a hadith that is in one of the, probably the #1 book of hadith for Sunni Muslims. So he's taking something that every Sunni Muslim accepts as an important, if not revered, reference book for hadiths. That book is not taken by the Shia. So the Shia don't have this problem of this big Adam. They're gone. Then you get into the Sunni tradition, which is 80 to 90%, and you get theological schools, and you get jurisprudential schools. The jurisprudential schools don't matter in this regard. It's not whether when I pray, I put my hands like this, or I hold them like this, or etc. That doesn't matter on my worldview or my beliefs. But in theological schools, and the theological schools are divided mainly into 3. One is the Mu'tazili. This is probably the most famous in the West. Mu'tazili because it is known as being the rationalistic theological school. It is the earliest and the strongly rationalistic school. Now we have a sort of slow comeback of what we call Neo-Mu'tazili. So this is a strong theological school that existed in the 9th and 10th century of Islam, died out later out of oppression and other things. The second and now largely dominant theological school is known as Ash'arism. Ash'arism is the orthodox, conservative, mostly denying of secondary causation. This is the school that supports, I'm simplifying but more or less true, supports the idea of occasionalism, meaning God recreates the world at every fraction of a second, and there is nothing that makes my ball drop to the, it's not about gravity pulling it to the ground, it is God taking it from here and putting it over there at every fraction of a second. It is God acting, not just sustaining the universe, acting. This is Ash'arism. And then there is the third one, dominant in Turkey, known as Maturidi. Maturidi is closer to Ash'arism, but a little bit with some rational ideas in there. So sort of a 2-minute crash course on Islamic theology and Islamic philosophy and Islamic schools. But as I said, I mean, it becomes very complicated. But what I presented is sort of the mainstream dominant ideas that prevail in Sunni Islam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My experience of teaching Muslim students in a school in the UK was that it wasn't apparent that, like you've said, it's forbidden for them to learn about evolution or anything to do with the cosmos. So
Right.
it wasn't apparent in that, and the schools haven't taken that on board. So we're still teaching
Thank God.
evolution and Big Bang theory.
Yeah.
But what the students would do is put up barriers to learning those aspects of science, or they'd be disengaged from getting involved in it. So I was just wondering, how is this information filtered down to the children in terms of their education?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, yeah. There are very few scholars to begin with who say it is forbidden for Muslims to even study evolution. And as I tell people, I say, there are very few Muslims, even in the Muslim world, who pay any attention to any such scholarly views. But But those views are out there, and those fatwas are out there, and from time to time you find people who take them up and implement them on their own, in their lives, or in their environments, or take them to the local imam. So I'll give you just two quick examples. There was a story that was actually publicized here in the UK. I think it was the Times of London and then some other newspapers that reported, I forget the year now, I have all the references, maybe 8 years ago or something, maybe 8 years ago, that Muslim students here in London, Muslim medical students, walked out and refused to study evolution at some university. There was another earlier incident that René is not here to confirm, but I also have the reference for this, in Holland, where some Muslim students refused to study evolution. And when they were asked, why, where do you find this, they pointed to some of these fatwas. And they said, it is against my beliefs. There is no point in me sitting there and being aggressed or assaulted with these atheistic views. So there are these issues out there. They are not dominant. They don't, as you said, filter down, but people sometimes access them, they read them, they see, and they act on them. The other thing is, I teach astronomy. I've written this sort of example many times. I teach astronomy, I don't teach evolution. I say, I already have enough problems teaching astronomy to my students, and God help my biology colleagues. When I get to planetary formation, the formation of the solar system, and I sort of, not deliberately, but I know where I'm going. I don't point to it, but I'm getting there. I say, okay, so the solar system formed, there was this nebula and started to rotate and this, and then there's the gravity of the sun and the objects are rotating, and then there are planets that appear, and then in this place there is this planet that is sort of mid-size, and it is cooling down now, and it has all kinds of gases, and then those gases escape, and they are replaced by carbon dioxide, and then at some point, because we, planet Earth, happen to be in the right zone, the habitable zone around the sun, then the water there is going to be liquid. This water came from the comets and the asteroids. There's plenty of water, and this water is liquid. That's the key ingredient and the key factor. And because there's liquid water, and at some point, life appears and starts to absorb carbon dioxide. And then you can see at this point, I am no longer in astronomy, but I am continuing with it. And not invariably, but very often somebody says, I say, yes. Are you taking on board Darwin's theory? And you're going with this evolutionary scenario, then life appeared, then it absorbs the carbon dioxide, and there's plants, and then there. So whoa, wait, are you going that way? And I pretend like I'm naive. And I say, is there a problem with that? And I say, you're saying that you can adopt Darwin's scenario and narrative and just continue with this whole description? We have no problem with the earth forming like this, but you're getting to life and evolution of life forms. Whoa. And so I take like half an hour and try to explain to them why there is no issue in this, and what's the supportive evidence, and why this does not contradict any beliefs in God. I am a complete believer. I am a total practicing Muslim, etc., etc. And then, and this is sort of the moral of the story, or the crux of the matter. 2 days later, there's a student who comes to me and he says, you know, when you were telling us the other day all of that stuff, I went to the imam and I asked him, is that permissible? And I said, why did you go to the imam for? What does he know about any of this? Again, I'm playing naive, but I'm sort of getting to their level of discussion. And he said, I went to the imam and I asked him, is it okay that the professor is telling us this stuff and I'm sort of absorbing this? What's Islam's view on this? And I said, if your imam has the proper scientific knowledge to really address your question, I have no objection. But if he doesn't have the necessary scientific background to discuss the formation of Earth, the appearance, emergence, creation of life, however we call it, and then the development, evolution of life, if he doesn't have all the understanding of how this went about, which we learn from science, then you shouldn't go and ask somebody who really doesn't know what they're talking about. So the point I'm trying to make is students go and seek religious sanction or religious fatwa to accept or reject, to listen or not to listen. So we have to be aware of this.
Thank you very much. I think we'll draw the discussion time to a close now as we're getting to lunch. Let's thank Professor Nidhal again.